Chapter 2. Intentionality, the intentional systems approach. Friedrich Nietzsche, in The Will to Power, wrote, "I notice something and seek a reason for it. This means originally, I seek an intention in it, and above all, someone who has intentions, a subject, a doer, every event a deed. Formerly, one saw intentions in all events. This is our oldest habit. Do animals also possess it?" With that in mind, let us start at the beginning and consider the birth of agency. No grain of sand has a mind. A grain of sand is too simple. Even simpler, no carbon atom or water molecule has a mind. I expect no serious disagreement about that. But what about larger molecules? A virus is a single huge molecule, a macromolecule composed of hundreds of thousands or even millions of parts, depending on how small the parts are that we count. These atomic-level parts interact, in their obviously mindless ways, to produce some quite striking effects. Chief among these effects, from the point of view of our investigation, is self-replication. Some macromolecules have the amazing ability, if left floating in a suitably well-furnished medium, to mindlessly construct and then shed exact or nearly exact copies of themselves. DNA and its ancestor, RNA, are such macromolecules. They are the foundation of all life on this planet and hence a historical precondition for all minds, at least all minds on this planet. For about 1 billion years before simple single-celled organisms appeared on Earth, there were self-replicating macromolecules, ceaselessly mutating, growing, even repairing themselves, and getting better and better at it, and replicating over and over again. This is a stupendous feat, still well beyond the capacity of any existing robot. Does that mean that such macromolecules have minds like ours? Certainly not. They're not even alive. They're just huge crystals from the point of view of chemistry. These gigantic molecules are tiny machines. Macromolecular nanotechnology. They are, in effect, natural robots. The possibility in principle of a self-replicating robot was mathematically demonstrated by John von Neumann, one of the inventors of the computer, whose brilliant design for a non-living self-replicator anticipated many of the details of design and construction of RNA and DNA. Through the microscope of molecular biology, we get to witness the birth of agency in the first macromolecules that have enough complexity to perform actions instead of just lying there having effects. Their agency is not fully-fledged agency like ours. They know not what they do. We, in contrast, often know full well what we do. At our best and at our worst, we human agents can perform intentional actions after having deliberated consciously about the reasons for and against. Macromolecular agency is different. There are reasons for what macromolecules do, but the macromolecules are unaware of those reasons. Their sort of agency is nevertheless the only possible ground from which the seeds of our kind of agency could grow. There is something alien and vaguely repellent about the quasi-agency we discover at this level. All that purposive hustle and bustle, and yet there's nobody home. The molecular machines performing their amazing stunts, obviously exquisitely designed and just as obviously none the wiser about what they're doing. Consider this account by molecular biologist Manfred Eigen of the activity of an RNA phage, a replicating virus and a modern-day descendant of the earliest self-replicating macromolecules. First of all, the virus needs a material in which to pack and protect its own genetic information. Secondly, it needs a means of introducing its information into the host cell. Thirdly, it requires a mechanism for the specific replication of its information in the presence of a vast excess of host cell RNA. Finally, it must arrange for the proliferation of its information, a process that usually leads to the destruction of the host cell. The virus even gets the cell to carry out its replication. Its only contribution is one protein factor, specially adapted for the viral RNA. This enzyme does not become active until a password on the viral RNA is shown. When it sees this, it reproduces the viral RNA with great efficiency, while ignoring the very much greater number of RNA molecules of the host cell. Consequently, the cell is soon flooded with viral RNA. This is packed into the virus coat protein, which is also synthesized in large quantities, and finally the cell bursts and releases a multitude of progeny virus particles. All this is a program that runs automatically and is rehearsed down to the smallest detail. The author has helped himself to a rich vocabulary of agency words. In order to reproduce, the virus must arrange for the proliferation of its information. And in furthering this goal, it creates an enzyme that sees its password and ignores other molecules. This is poetic license, to be sure. These words have had their meanings stretched for the occasion. But what an irresistible stretch! The agency words draw attention to the most striking features of the phenomena. These macromolecules are systematic. Their control systems are not just efficient at what they do, they are appropriately sensitive to variation, opportunistic, ingenious, devious. They can be fooled, but only by novelties not regularly encountered by their ancestors. These impersonal, unreflective, robotic, mindless little scraps of molecular machinery are the ultimate basis of all the agency, and hence meaning, and hence consciousness in the world. It is rare for such a solid and uncontroversial scientific fact to have such potent implications for structuring all subsequent debate about something as controversial and mysterious as minds. So let's pause to remind ourselves of these implications. There is no longer any serious informed doubt about this. We are the direct descendants of these self-replicating robots. We are mammals, and all mammals are descended from reptilian ancestors, whose ancestors were fish, whose ancestors were marine creatures rather like worms, who descended in turn from simpler multi-celled creatures several 100 million years ago, who descended from single-celled creatures, who descended from self-replicating macromolecules about 3 billion years ago. There is just one family tree on which all living things that have ever lived on this planet can be found. Not just animals, but plants and algae and bacteria as well. You share a common ancestor with every chimpanzee, every worm, every blade of grass, every redwood tree. Among our progenitors, then, were macromolecules. To put it vividly, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was a robot. Not only are you descended from such macromolecular robots, but you are composed of them. Your hemoglobin molecules, your antibodies, your neurons, your vestibular ocular reflex machinery. At every level of analysis from the molecular on up, your body, including your brain, of course, is found to be composed of machinery that dumbly does a wonderful, elegantly designed job. We have ceased to shudder, perhaps, at the scientific vision of viruses and bacteria busily and mindlessly executing their subversive projects, horrid little automata doing their evil deeds. But we should not think that we can take comfort in the thought that they are alien invaders, so unlike the more congenial tissues that make up us. We are made the same sorts of automata that invade us. No special halos of humanity distinguish your antibodies from the antigens they combat. Your antibodies simply belong to the club that is you, so they fight on your behalf. The billions of neurons that band together to make your brain are cells, the same sort of biological entity as the germs that cause infections, or the yeast cells that multiply in the vat when beer is fermenting, or in the dough when bread rises. Each cell, a tiny agent that can perform a limited number of tasks, is about as mindless as a virus. Can it be that if enough of these dumb homunculi, little men, are put together, the result will be a real conscious person with a genuine mind? According to modern science, there's no other way of making a real person. Now, it certainly does not follow from the fact that we are descended from robots that we are robots ourselves. After all, we are also direct descendants of fish, and we are not fish. We are direct descendants of bacteria, and we are not bacteria. But unless there is some secret extra ingredient in us, which is what dualists and vitalists used to think, we are made of robots. Or, what comes to the same thing, we are each a collection of trillions of macromolecular machines. And all of these are ultimately descended from the original self-replicating macromolecules. So something made of robots can exhibit genuine consciousness because you do, if anything does. To some people, all this seems shocking and unlikely, I realize, but I suspect that they haven't noticed how desperate the alternatives are. Dualism, the view that minds are composed of some non-physical and utterly mysterious stuff, and vitalism, the view that living things contain some special physical but equally mysterious stuff, élan vital, have been relegated to the trash heap of history along with alchemy and astrology. Unless you are also prepared to declare that the world is flat and the sun is a fiery chariot pulled by winged horses, unless, in other words, your defiance of modern science is quite complete, you won't find any place to stand and fight for these obsolete ideas. So let's see what story can be told with the conservative resources of science. Maybe the idea that our minds evolved from simpler minds is not so bad after all. Our macromolecule ancestors, and that's exactly and unmetaphorically what they were, our ancestors, were agent-like in some ways, as the quotation from Manfred Eigen makes clear. And yet in other ways they were undeniably passive, floating randomly around, pushed hither and yon, waiting for action with their guns cocked, you might say, but not waiting hopefully or resolutely or intently. Their jaws might have gaped, but they were as mindless as a steel trap. What changed? Nothing sudden. Before our ancestors got minds, they got bodies. First, they became simple cells, or prokaryotes. And eventually, the prokaryotes took in some invaders or boarders, and thereby became complex cells, the eukaryotes. By this time, roughly 1 billion years after the first appearance of simple cells, our ancestors were already extraordinarily complex machines, made of machines, but they still didn't have minds. They were as passive and undirected in their trajectories as ever, but now they were equipped with many specialized subsystems for extracting energy and material from the environment and protecting and repairing themselves when necessary. The elaborate organization of all these coordinated parts was not very much like a mind. Aristotle had a name for it, or for its descendants. He called it a nutritive soul. A nutritive soul is not a thing. It is not, for instance, one of the microscopic subsystems floating around in the cytoplasm of a cell. It is a principle of organization. It is form, not substance, as Aristotle said. All living things, not only plants and animals, but also unicellular organisms, have bodies that require a self-regulative and self-protective organization that can be differentially activated by different conditions. These organizations are brilliantly designed by natural selection, and they are composed at bottom of lots of tiny passive switches that can be turned on or off by equally passive conditions that the organisms encounter in their wanderings. You yourself, like all other animals, have a nutritive soul, a self-regulative, self-protective organization, quite distinct from and more ancient than your nervous system. It consists of your metabolic system, your immune system, and the other staggeringly complex systems of self-repair and health maintenance in your body. The lines of communication used by these early systems were not nerves, but blood vessels. Long before there were telephones and radios, there was the postal service, reliably, if rather slowly, transporting physical packages of valuable information around the world. And long before there were nervous systems in organisms, bodies relied on a low-tech postal system of sorts, the circulation of fluids within the body, reliably, if rather slowly, transporting valuable packages of information to where they were needed for control and self-maintenance. We see the descendants of this primordial postal system in both animals and plants. In animals, the bloodstream carries goods and waste, but it has also been since the early days an information highway. The motion of fluids within plants also provides a relatively rudimentary medium for getting signals from one part of the plant to another. But in animals, we can see a major design innovation, the evolution of simple nervous systems, ancestors of the autonomic nervous system, capable of swifter and more efficient information transmission, but still devoted in the main to internal affairs. An autonomic nervous system is not a mind at all, but rather a control system more along the lines of the nutritive soul of a plant that preserves the basic integrity of the living system. We sharply distinguish these ancient systems from our minds, and yet, curiously, the closer we look at the details of their operation, the more mind-like we find them to be. The little switches are like primitive sense organs, and the effects that are produced when these switches are turned on and off are like intentional actions. How so? In being effects produced by information-modulated, goal-seeking systems. It is as if these cells and cell assemblies were tiny, simple-minded agents, specialized servants, rationally furthering their particular obsessive causes by acting in the ways their perception of circumstances dictated. The world is teeming with such entities, ranging from the molecular to the continental in size, and including not only natural objects, such as plants, animals, and their parts, and the parts of their parts, but also many human artifacts. Thermostats, for example. I call all these entities, from the simplest to the most complex, intentional systems, and I call the perspective from which their agenthood, pseudo or genuine, is made visible, the intentional stance. Adopting the intentional stance. The intentional stance is the strategy of interpreting the behavior of an entity, person, animal, artifact, whatever, by treating it as if it were a rational agent who governed its choice of action by a consideration of its beliefs and desires. These terms in scare quotes have been stretched out of their home use in what's often called folk psychology, the everyday psychological discourse we use to discuss the mental lives of our fellow human beings. The intentional stance is the attitude or perspective we routinely adopt toward one another. So adopting the intentional stance toward something else seems to be deliberately anthropomorphizing it. How could this possibly be a good idea? I will try to show that if done with care, adopting the intentional stance is not just a good idea, but the key to unraveling the mysteries of the mind, all kinds of minds. It is a method that exploits similarities in order to discover differences, the huge collection of differences that have accumulated between the minds of our ancestors and ours, and also between our minds and those of our fellow inhabitants of the planet. It must be used with caution. We must walk a tightrope between vacuous metaphor on the one hand and literal falsehood on the other. Improper use of the intentional stance can seriously mislead the unwary researcher, but properly understood it can provide a sound and fruitful perspective in several different fields, exhibiting underlying unity in the phenomena and directing our attention to the crucial experiments that need to be conducted. The basic strategy of the intentional stance is to treat the thing we're considering as an agent in order to predict and thereby explain, in one sense, its actions or moves. The distinctive features of the intentional stance can best be seen by contrasting it with two more basic stances or strategies of prediction, the physical stance and the design stance. The physical stance is simply the standard laborious method of the physical sciences, in which we use whatever we know about the laws of physics and the physical constitution of the things in question to devise our prediction. When I predict that a stone released from my hand will fall to the ground, I'm using the physical stance. I don't attribute beliefs and desires to the stone. I attribute mass or weight to the stone and rely on the law of gravity to deliver my prediction. For things that are neither alive nor artifacts, the physical stance is the only available strategy, though it can be conducted at various levels of detail from the subatomic to the astronomical. Explanations of why water bubbles when it boils, how mountain ranges come into existence, and where the energy in the sun comes from are explanations from the physical stance. Every physical thing, whether designed or alive or not, is subject to the laws of physics, and hence behaves in ways that can be explained and predicted from the physical stance. If the thing I release from my hand is an alarm clock or a goldfish, I make the same prediction about its downward trajectory on the same basis. And even a model airplane or a bird, which may well take a different trajectory when released, behaves in ways that obey the laws of physics at every scale and at every moment. Alarm clocks, or thermostats, being, unlike the rock, designed objects, are also amenable to a fancier style of prediction from the design stance. The design stance is a wonderful shortcut which we all use all the time. Suppose someone gives me a new digital alarm clock. It's a make and model quite novel to me, but a brief examination of its exterior buttons and displays convinces me that if I depress a few buttons just so, then, some hours later, the alarm clock will make a loud noise. I don't know what kind of noise it will be, but it will be sufficient to awaken me. I don't need to work out the specific physical laws that explain this marvelous regularity. I don't need to take the thing apart, weighing its parts and measuring the voltages. I simply assume that it has a particular design, the design we call an alarm clock, and that it will function properly, as designed. I'm prepared to risk quite a lot on this prediction. Not my life, perhaps, but my waking up in time to get to my scheduled lecture or catch a train. Design stance predictions are riskier than physical stance predictions because of the extra assumptions I have to take on board, that an entity is designed as I suppose it to be, and that it will operate according to that design. That is, it will not malfunction. Design things are occasionally misdesigned, and sometimes they break. But this moderate price I pay in riskiness is more than compensated by the tremendous ease of prediction. Design stance prediction, when applicable, is a low-cost, low-risk shortcut, enabling me to finesse the tedious application of my limited knowledge of physics. In fact, we all routinely risk our lives on design stance predictions. We unhesitatingly plug in and turn on electrical appliances that could kill us if miswired. We voluntarily step into buses we know will soon accelerate us to lethal speeds. We calmly press buttons in elevators we have never been in before. Design stance prediction works wonderfully on well-designed artifacts, but it also works wonderfully on Mother Nature's artifacts, living things and their parts. Long before the physics and chemistry of plant growth and reproduction were understood, our ancestors quite literally bet their lives on the reliability of their design stance knowledge of what seeds were supposed to do when planted. If I press a few seeds into the ground just so, then, in a few months, with a modicum of further care for me, there will be food here to eat. We have just seen that design stance predictions are risky compared with physical stance predictions, which are safe but tedious to work out. And an even riskier and swifter stance is the intentional stance. It can be viewed, if you like, as a subspecies of the design stance, in which the design thing is an agent of sorts. Suppose we apply it to the alarm clock. This alarm clock is my servant if I command it to wake me up. By giving it to understand a particular time of awakening, I can rely on its internal ability to perceive when that time has arrived and dutifully execute the action it has promised. As soon as it comes to believe that the time for noise is now, it will be motivated, thanks to my earlier instructions, to act accordingly. No doubt the alarm clock is so simple that this fanciful anthropomorphism is, strictly speaking, unnecessary for our understanding of why it does what it does. But notice that this is how we might explain to a child how to use an alarm clock. You tell it when you want it to wake you up, and it remembers to do so by making a loud noise. Adoption of the intentional stance is more useful, indeed well-nigh obligatory, when the artifact in question is much more complicated than an alarm clock. My favorite example is a chess-playing computer. There are hundreds of different computer programs that can turn a computer, whether it's a laptop or a supercomputer, into a chess player. For all their differences at the physical level and the design level, these computers all succumb neatly to the same simple strategy of interpretation. Just think of them as rational agents who want to win and who know the rules and principles of chess and the positions of the pieces on the board. Instantly, your problem of predicting and interpreting their behavior is made vastly easier than it would be if you tried to use the physical or the design stance. At any moment in the chess game, simply look at the chessboard and draw up a list of all the legal moves available to the computer when it is its turn to play. There will usually be several dozen candidates. Why restrict yourself to legal moves? Because, you reason, it wants to play winning chess and knows it must make only legal moves to win. So, being rational, it restricts itself to these. Now rank the legal moves from best, wisest, most rational, to worst, stupidest, most self-defeating. And make your prediction. The computer will make the best move. You may well not be sure what the best move is. The computer may appreciate the situation better than you do. But you can almost always eliminate all but 4 or 5 candidate moves, which still gives you tremendous predictive leverage. Sometimes, when the computer finds itself in a tough predicament, with only one non-suicidal move to make, a forced move, you can predict its move with supreme confidence. Nothing about the laws of physics forces this move, and nothing about the specific design of the computer forces this move. The move is forced by the overwhelmingly good reasons for making it and not any other move. Any chess player constructed out of whatever physical materials would make it. Even a ghost or an angel would make it. You come up with your intentional stance prediction on the basis of your bold assumption that no matter how the computer program has been designed, it has been designed well enough to be moved by such a good reason. You predict its behavior as if it were a rational agent. The intentional stance is undeniably a useful shortcut in such a case, but how seriously should we take it? What does a computer care, really, about whether it wins or loses? Why say that the alarm clock desires to obey its master? We can use this contrast between natural and artificial goals to heighten our appreciation of the fact that all real goals ultimately spring from the predicament of a living, self-protective thing. But we must also recognize that the intentional stance works, when it does, whether or not the attributed goals are genuine or natural or really appreciated by the so-called agent. And this tolerance is crucial to understanding how genuine goal-seeking could be established in the first place. Does the macromolecule really want to replicate itself? The intentional stance explains what is going on, regardless of how we answer that question. Consider a simple organism, say a planarian or an amoeba, moving non-randomly across the bottom of a laboratory dish, always heading to the nutrient-rich end of the dish or away from the toxic end. This organism is seeking the good or shunning the bad, its own good and bad, not those of some human artifact user. Seeking one's own good is a fundamental feature of any rational agent. But are these simple organisms really seeking, or just, quotes, seeking? We don't need to answer that question. The organism is a predictable intentional system in either case. This is another way of making Socrates' point in the Meno, when he asks whether anyone ever knowingly desires evil. We intentional systems do sometimes desire evil through misunderstanding or misinformation or sheer lunacy, but it is part and parcel of rationality to desire what is deemed good. It is this constitutive relationship between the good and the seeking of the good that is endorsed, or rather enforced, by the natural selection of our forebears. Those with the misfortune to be genetically designed so that they seek what is bad for them leave no descendants in the long run. It is no accident that the products of natural selection seek, or, in scare quotes, seek, what they deem, or, in scare quotes, deem to be good. Even the simplest organisms, if they are to favor what is good for them, needs some sense organs or discriminative powers, some simple switches that turn on in the presence of good and off in its absence. And these switches, or transducers as they are called, must be united to the right bodily responses. This requirement is the birth of function. A rock can't malfunction, for it has not been well or ill-equipped to further any good. When we decide to interpret an entity from the intentional stance, it is as if we put ourselves in the role of its guardian, asking ourselves, in effect, if I were in this organism's predicament, what would I do? And here we expose the underlying anthropomorphism of the intentional stance. We treat all intentional systems as if they were just like us, which of course they are not. Is this then a misapplication of our own perspective, the perspective we mind-havers share? Not necessarily. From the vantage point of evolutionary history, this is what has happened. Over billions of years, organisms gradually evolved, accumulating ever more versatile machinery designed to further their ever more complex and articulated goods. Eventually, with the evolution in our species of language and the varieties of reflectiveness that language permits, a topic for later chapters, we emerged with the ability to wonder the wonders with which we began this book, wonders about the minds of other entities. These wonders, naively conducted by our ancestors, led to animism, the idea that each moving thing has a mind or soul. The word comes from the Latin anima, a soul. We began to ask ourselves not only whether the tiger wanted to eat us, which it probably did, but why the rivers wanted to reach the seas, and what the clouds wanted from us in return for the rain we asked of them. As we became more sophisticated, and this is a very recent historical development, not anything to be discerned in the vast reaches of evolutionary time, we gradually withdrew the intentional stance from what we now call inanimate nature, reserving it for things more like us, animals in the main, but also plants under many conditions. We still trick flowers into blooming prematurely by deceiving them with artificial spring warmth and light, and encourage vegetables to send down longer roots by withholding from them the water they want so badly. A logger once explained to me that he knew we would find no white pines among the trees in some high ground in my forest. Pines like to keep their feet wet. This way of thinking about plants is not only natural and harmless, but positively an aid to comprehension and an important lever for discovery. When biologists discover that a plant has some rudimentary discriminatory organ, they immediately ask themselves what the organ is for. What devious project does the plant have that requires it to obtain information from its environment on this topic? Very often the answer is an important scientific discovery. Intentional systems are, by definition, all and only those entities whose behavior is predictable or explicable from the intentional stance. Self-replicating macromolecules, thermostats, amoebas, plants, rats, bats, people, and chess-playing computers are all intentional systems, some much more interesting than others. Since the point of the intentional stance is to treat an entity as an agent in order to predict its actions, we have to suppose that it is a smart agent, since a stupid agent might do any dumb thing at all. This bold leap of supposing that the agent will make only the smart moves, given its limited perspective, is what gives us the leverage to make predictions. We describe that limited perspective by attributing particular beliefs and desires to the agent on the basis of its perception of the situation and its goals or needs. Since our predictive leverage in this exercise is critically dependent on this particularity, since it is sensitive to the particular way the beliefs and desires are expressed by us, the theorists, or represented by the intentional system in question, I call such systems intentional systems. They exhibit what philosophers call intentionality. Intentionality, in this special philosophical sense, is such a controversial concept and is so routinely misunderstood and misused by non-philosophers that I must pause to belabor its definition. Unfortunately for interdisciplinary communication, the philosophical term intentionality has a false friend, a perfectly good word that is readily confused with it and is indeed rather closely related to it. In ordinary parlance, we often discuss whether someone's action was intentional or not. When the driver crashed into the bridge abutment, was he intentionally committing suicide or had he fallen asleep? When you called the policeman Dad just then, was that intentional or a slip of the tongue? Here we are asking, are we not, about the intentionality of the two deeds? Yes in the ordinary sense, no in the philosophical sense. Intentionality in the philosophical sense is just aboutness. Something exhibits intentionality if its competence is in any way about something else. An alternative would be to say that something that exhibits intentionality contains a representation of something else, but I find that less revealing and more problematic. Does a lock contain a representation of the key that opens it? A lock and key exhibit the crudest form of intentionality. So do the opioid receptors in brain cells, receptors that are designed to accept the endorphin molecules that nature has been providing in brains for millions of years. Both can be tricked, that is, opened by an imposter. Morphine molecules are artifactual skeleton keys that have recently been fashioned to open the opioid receptor doors too. In fact, it was the discovery of these highly specific receptors which inspired the search that led to the discovery of the natural endorphins, the brain's own painkillers. There must have been something already present in the brain, researchers reasoned, for these specialized receptors to have been about. This lock and key variety of crude aboutness is the basic design element out of which nature has fashioned the fancier sorts of subsystems that may more deservedly be called representation systems. So we will have to analyze the aboutness of these representations in terms of the quasi-aboutness of locks and keys in any case. We can stretch a point and say that the present shape of the bimetallic spring in a thermostat is a representation of the present room temperature, and that the position of the thermostat's adjustable lever is a representation of the desired room temperature. But we can equally well deny that these are, properly speaking, representations. They do, however, embody information about room temperature, and it is by virtue of that embodiment that they contribute to the competence of a simple intentional system. Why do philosophers call aboutness intentionality? It all goes back to the medieval philosophers who coined the term, noting the similarity between such phenomena and the act of aiming an arrow at something, intendere arcum in. Intentional phenomena are equipped with metaphorical arrows, you might say, aimed at something or other, at whatever it is the phenomena are about, or refer to, or allude to. But of course, many phenomena that exhibit this minimal sort of intentionality do not do anything intentionally in the everyday sense of the term. Perceptual states, emotional states, and states of memory, for example, all exhibit aboutness without necessarily being intentional in the ordinary sense. They can be entirely involuntary or automatic responses to one thing or another. There is nothing intentional in the ordinary sense about recognizing a horse when it looms into view. But your state of recognition exhibits very particular aboutness. You recognize it as a horse. If you had misperceived it as a moose or a man on a motorcycle, your perceptual state would have had a different aboutness. It would have aimed its arrow rather differently, at something non-existent, in fact, but nevertheless quite definite, either the moose that never was or the illusory motorcyclist. There is a large psychological difference between mistakenly thinking you're in the presence of a moose and mistakenly thinking you're in the presence of a man on a motorcycle, a difference with predictable consequences. The medieval theorists noted that the arrow of intentionality could thus be aimed at nothing, while nevertheless being aimed in a rather particular way. They called the object of your thought, real or not, the intentional object. In order to think about something, you must have a way, one way among many possible ways, of thinking about it. Any intentional system is dependent on its particular ways of thinking about, perceiving, searching for, identifying, fearing, recalling, whatever it is that its thoughts are about. It is this dependency that creates all the opportunities for confusion, both practical and theoretically. In practice, the best way to confuse a particular intentional system is to exploit a flaw in its way or ways of perceiving or thinking about whatever it needs to think about. Nature has explored countless variations on this theme, since confusing other intentional systems is a major goal in the life of most intentional systems. After all, one of the primary desires of any living intentional system is the desire for the food needed to fuel growth, self-repair, and reproduction. So every living thing needs to distinguish the food, the good material, from the rest of the world. It follows that another primary desire is to avoid becoming the food of another intentional system. So camouflage, mimicry, stealth, and a host of other stratagems have put nature's locksmiths to the test, provoking the evolution of ever more effective ways of distinguishing one thing from another and keeping track of them. But no way is ever foolproof. There is no taking without the possibility of mistaking. That's why it's so important for us as theorists to be able to identify and distinguish the different varieties of taking and mistaking that can occur in intentional systems. In order to make sense of a system's actual take on its circumstances, we have to have an accurate picture of its dependence on its particular capacities for distinguishing things, its ways of thinking about things. So, in summary, the original self-replicating macromolecules had reasons for what they did, but had no inkling of them. We, in contrast, not only know, or think we know, our reasons, we articulate them, discuss them, criticize them, share them. They are not just the reasons we act, they are reasons for us. In between the macromolecules and us, there's quite a story to be told. Consider, for instance, the fledgling cuckoo, hatched in an alien nest by unwitting adoptive parents. Its first action when it emerges from its egg is to roll the other eggs out of the nest. This is not an easy task, and it is quite astonishing to watch the ferocious single-mindedness and resourcefulness with which the baby bird overcomes whatever obstacles lie in its way to jettison the other eggs. Why does it do this? Because those eggs contain rivals for the attentions of its surrogate providers. By disposing of these rivals, it maximizes the food and protective care it will receive. The newborn cuckoo is, of course, oblivious. It has no inkling of this rationale for its ruthless act. But the rationale is there, and has undoubtedly shaped this innate behavior over the eons. We can see it, even if the cuckoo can't. I call such a rationale free-floating, because it is nowhere represented in the fledgling or anywhere else, even though it is operative over evolutionary time in shaping and refining the behavior in question, in providing for its informational needs, for instance. The strategic principles involved are not explicitly encoded, but just implicit in the larger organization of designed features. How did those reasons get captured and articulated in some of the minds that have evolved? That's what we'll consider next.